here with another edition of SVG Sports Tech On Demand. I'm Jason Dackman, Chief Editor at SVG, and we're joined by Gerard Phillips. He's a systems engineer with Arista Networks. Gerard, thanks so much for joining us today. Where are you calling us from?
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm in the UK. So it's a little bit damp, but very pleasant.
Sure. Well, hopefully we end up getting to do some in-person events someday soon. But for now, you guys have been extremely busy over at Arista. Obviously, since the transition to IP began several years ago within the media and entertainment industry, we've seen Arista switches throughout a number of facilities and installations. So what's new with you guys, and what changes are you seeing in the industry, especially around that IP adoption?
There's a ton of new stuff. What are we seeing around the industry? I guess, obviously the pandemic has brought enormous changes to how we work. Fewer staff at events and fewer staff in facilities, more working from home. I think we're seeing that the uptake of 2110 and the acceleration of what is possible in the cloud has really moved forwards. I think these factors have really played into accelerating the move away from the more traditional bespoke hardware platforms towards IP and software. I kind of think it's reminiscent of the tape shortages of 2011 and how that pushed us all to, away from tape and towards the kind of file-based workflows. I think as the 2110 ecosystem is maturing, which it is, then the industry knowledge bases are increasing, and we're seeing way more innovation and creative ways to use and benefit from IP. Kind of whether that's EMG's like really cool modular system, or just the sheer scale of the Discovery Eurosport network that's going up.
Sure.
And I think with these sorts of projects, we're seeing the real benefits from the adoption of the technologies that are being pushed forwards by the cloud titans. So like 400 gig switching and routing platforms, huge amounts of automation, and the price being pushed down, frankly.
Sure. Yeah. Let's follow up on the 400 gig infrastructure. I think there was certainly a point when you would think media and entertainment, that doesn't necessarily have a place here. But especially as these facilities are getting more sophisticated and the 2110 ecosystem is being cultivated more, I would think that, again, those 400 gig systems are probably more of interest in the media and entertainment. Is that right? Yeah.
I think that is a great question. How is 400 gig relevant to this market, right? An HD 2110 flow is a little over a gigabit at a 1080i. So where does 400 gig come into a world where you've got these gigabit flows? And it's I think the ability of the broadcast industry to easily access 400 gig, it's going to greatly simplify the way that we build media networks. So whilst it seems overkill now, the more bandwidth you have, the easier it is to scale, and the fewer restrictions you can place on what you do with that network of scale. So the cloud titans again have brought down the costs. They're driving down the cost of 2500 and 400 gig components, switches and optics, and it makes it way more affordable, and it makes it way easier to build these big networks. So if you think kind of back in the SDI world, then like an 1152 square 3 gig router was a big deal, right?
Sure.
I don't know how physically big it is, but it's like 3.5 terabits a second of throughput. To put that in context, like a 1RU 24 times 400 gig switch is almost 20 terabits of throughput. That's roughly six times the throughput. So I think what we will see is facilities that might have been built as a series of islands of SDI routing will, connected together by tie lines, will become in IP much more universally connected. So really enabling the sharing of kit and media and people and locations much more freely. And of course, 400 gig is just the beginning. We've got a clear roadmap to 800 gigs now.
Sure. Yeah. And you kind of said it, but we're really finally seeing that capitalization of the potential of IP rather than just saying, okay, we're going to go IP. You can actually see no more islands, a full holistic ecosystem within some of these facilities enabled by that IP infrastructure. And speaking of, I'm curious, we've seen 2110, become essentially, the primary adopted format for IP installations. And has that continued to grow? Do you think that the 2110 roadmap is in good shape right now compared to maybe where it was 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's based on the standards moving forwards, and 2110 standards moving forwards, and the ISO 4 standards moving forwards. But and I think our experience is that we saw a really good uptake in Europe a couple of years ago. 2110 seemed to be, Europe was the place to be for 2110.
Right.
That has now moved. I think what we're seeing is the center of gravity has moved to the US. I think the scale in the US is growing really quickly. I think to come back to kind of the point you just made, I think it's also moving very quickly out of the studio and the OB trucks. I think there's a lot of interest in being able to share the media much more widely than the local production campus, and we're seeing that IP take up and connectivity really happening across both private optical networks and the more traditional SP networks. And I think that's being driven by a lot of capability, the bandwidth, and the standardization of ways of connecting stuff together. So
sure.
Yeah, absolutely, seeing a lot more take up of connectivity, and stuff like MACsec and IPsec are great technologies that will allow that to happen, and to happen more securely.
Great, excellent, and good to hear that stateside is catching up with the European sector, because you're right. A few years ago, the states were certainly running behind on the 2110 advancement.
Yes.
Want to close out with just wondering what you guys have coming down the pike at Arista when it comes to the broadcast and the media and entertainment space. What can we expect from you in the next few months, couple years maybe?
Yeah. Well, more of the same. Continued disruption of the kind of switching and routing marketplace, specifically in the M&E sector. So the merchant silicon strategy we've got means that we're constantly bringing out newer, faster, cheaper, smaller boxes. You can see that in the 400 gig all the way down to kind of giggy PoE switches that are constantly coming out. Single network operating system on the box just means that the life is easier for the operations folks, and more functionality to do with PTP scale, resilience, monitoring. Monitoring I've not really mentioned at all, but tons and tons of new monitoring features in CloudVision, which is our network management tool. The ability to visualize flows through the network, find devices by IP and MAC addresses, nail down where specific hosts are, turning status in the network into events in the network, which gives the operators the opportunity to be helped to understand what to pay attention to. Bubbling the important stuff up, really. So kind of both range, features, and I think visibility is probably one of the big things that's coming down the pipe very quickly.
Excellent. Well, very happy to hear that we'll get much more of the same. We've seen so much advancement from you guys over the last few years, and you played such a big role in bringing IP to the M&E and broadcast space. So keep it up, and hopefully we can see each other in person at some point down the line and have a pint. But if not for then, for now, just stay safe, and thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity.